afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen, and I'm the Executive Director here at USTA Florida. We're kicking off April with a brand new topic and a very special guest. My guest today is Eric Poms, the Chief Executive Officer of the Orange Bowl Committee. Eric's been with the Orange Bowl Committee for more than 30 years, and his list of accomplishments is too long for me to go over in this brief introduction, so I'll just name a few. Eric spearheaded the Orange Bowl Committee's inclusion in the new college football playoff that began in 2014 and 2015. And under his leadership, the organization has twice hosted 2 BCS Bowl games in the same season. Of course, Eric also oversaw the organization's 75th anniversary celebration in 2008 and 2009. We know a little bit about that, of course, because we're celebrating ours right now. And in addition to all of that, he's actually been at the forefront of the postseason college football structure during its frequent era of growth. So he's really been a leader when it comes to the football space. But what excites me even more is that Eric is a champion for tennis, particularly here in South Florida. Eric grew up playing tennis, and he graduated from high school in South Florida. He also got his business degree from the University of Florida. And since he's been in Florida working for the Orange Bowl Committee, he's also been involved locally in his community. He was recently appointed to the board of the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau, and he's very active with the Boys and Girls Club of Miami, where he has served on the executive committee since 1996. I am so pleased to share this episode of the podcast with you. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Please check out our social media pages and leave a comment or a question for us, or maybe share your favorite memory of the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships.
Eric, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Laura, it's great being with you and looking forward to talking about tennis and everything you're doing at the USTA Florida. It's spectacular.
Well, you actually are able to talk about a topic we've never covered on the Here to Serve podcast before. So I'm very excited whenever I have a new guest and a new topic. And what's really special about today is we're celebrating USTA Florida's 75th anniversary, but we also can celebrate the history of the Orange Bowl Tennis Championships, which actually go back even further than we do. So, fun fact, the Orange Bowl Tennis Championship and USTA Florida both started in the 1940s in Miami Beach. So you could kind of say we grew up together. We're like siblings, with maybe the Orange Bowl being a little bit of an older sibling to us.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about how and why tennis became an early part of the Orange Bowl mission?
It's a great question. First and foremost, the Orange Bowl is now entering our 91st year. We were founded in 1935 officially. You could make the argument that 1933 were really the origins of the Orange Bowl, but it was a very modest, festival built around the idea of a football game. They saw what was happening in Pasadena, California with the Rose Bowl. At the time, Miami wasn't the flash that it is today. It was a town, a city that was coming off a hurricane in the 1920s that was pretty devastating. It was the time of the Depression, and they were looking for tourists to come to the region. And so events were created, and after the football game got going in 1935, we're talking about now into the 40s, that's a name that I think many of your listeners would know. Eddie Herr was kind of the pioneer behind it. As I understand it, he had a daughter that played, and there weren't enough tournaments for her to compete in. So he had this idea, and he lived on Miami Beach, and there was Flamingo Park, which still stands to this day, beautiful park. And that was the origins of the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships. I've been here 30 years. When I first got here, I met with Eddie Herr, and
Did
he was in
you?
his seventh. I did. I think his
Wow.
grandson had reached out. Donna Fales
Mm-hmm.
was our tournament director forever. She was amazing. She's a legend, still around the South Florida community. And I don't know how I ended up going to his house, and I met with him and his grandson, I believe it was, and I heard the whole history. But as I've been here now, it's like I said, 30 years for me. I've come to really appreciate, what tennis means to Orange Bowl, because certainly we're known for the bowl game, and the Capital One Orange Bowl today is a staple in the college football playoff. The legends of lore, whether it's players, coaches, so many I can name that would capture your audience, but I'm not sure it would ever meet what tennis is. And when you look at, the history and what it was in its early days, a lot of international players came
Mm-hmm.
to America, and their first taste of competition was the Orange Bowl. And to see the champions that I'm sure we'll talk about here, they're just iconic. And so I think as you look at the history of Orange Bowl, all the events that we do, there's so many, sailing regatta, and the basketball classic,
Mm-hmm.
and so many events that we do. I'm not sure anything would touch what tennis brings to Orange Bowl brand.
I love that history and that perspective that you just gave, particularly about Eddie Herr. And we've talked about him with the past history of USTA Florida being one of our founders. Obviously, you have the Eddie Herr tournament that's legendary as well. And I think that idea that you had these really dedicated, committed group of volunteers who came together and said, Florida is such a special place for tennis. And they started it at the grassroots level with these types of events to serve the community, the broader tennis community. And then you see how that just builds over time. And now we sort of stand in their shadow in a lot of ways. And I don't think a lot of people also outside of Florida may not realize that the Orange Bowl football championship game actually is connected to this major international tennis tournament. Like, people may not be connecting those dots. And so it's kind of fun that that's a tribute back to the legacy of starting at Flamingo Park, which still I think has football fields there, if I'm not mistaken. So you've got football and tennis right next to each other. And people wouldn't necessarily put the two together, but yet here we are with the Miami Open in a football stadium. So the two sports have kind of like had this wonderful like flamenco dance together for years. And I think having it sort of tribute to that legacy with the Orange Bowl is such a beautiful thing and a beautiful fun fact that people outside of Florida may know.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I was born in Detroit, but I don't remember it. I grew up in Miami, and I had my dad was from the DC area, and I had a cousin that played competitive tennis, and he played in the Orange Bowl, and it was my first taste of Orange Bowl. I was a little kid, and I went out to watch him play, and back then you knew how hard it was to be a champion of the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships. It was just revered on the calendar by so many players and spectators alike. But you got to go back to any organization's history and where it begins, and it's usually has humble beginnings, but it builds upon itself. And I just remember coming here. I started in 1993. I got introduced to Donna Fales. She ran our tournament. And when I went out to Flamingo Park for the first time, there's a plaque on the building. It's still there, of all the champions. And I looked at it, and it was like, as a youngster growing up, when in the 70s, when Chris Everett was everything, Connors, Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe, and you look at this plaque
Mm-hmm.
of Von Lendl, they're all on this plaque, and I was blown away. And I started thinking about it because my background was I went to the University of Florida. I was a basketball manager, and I was immersed in basketball. And that was the days where, college basketball players stayed for 4 years. And you always hear the story of Michael Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
went out for his high school team. He didn't make
Didn't
it.
make it. Yeah.
You start thinking about it and go, who really knew who Michael Jordan was and what he was going to become?
Mm-hmm.
He was in high school. I mean, it wasn't the media of today. It was getting Street and Smith magazine and seeing what it was. And you extrapolate that to tennis. And I sit there and I go, how many champions came through Orange Bowl besides people like you who are like immersed in tennis that knows who they're watching right now? And I started looking, recently back at the years I've been here and the champions that have come out of here, and like they were there. I was watching them. I didn't realize they were going to go on to win
Yeah.
Wimbledon, U.S. Open, etc. And you realize it's a crown jewel, and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be cherished. And while we're known for a lot of things here, particularly the college bowl game, I would tell you that our membership, which is 400 members of the Orange Bowl Committee, cherish this tournament. It means a lot to this organization, to this community, to this country, and hopefully internationally it has its rightful place.
Well, it means a lot to us too, and that's something we have really in common is that it is not just sort of the crown jewel of the Orange Bowl, but it is really the crown jewel of Florida tennis in many ways. And I'm going to ask you a little bit of an unfair question. It's like telling your children, like comparing your children in some ways. And I don't have children, so I can ask this question, and then the people who have kids get really uncomfortable. So my question for you is like, you're the CEO of the Orange Bowl, so you kind of oversee all of these sporting events, and you've got a team dedicated to these things. What can we learn? A tennis is kind of unique and it has its own strengths and weaknesses, but what could we learn or take away maybe from some of the other sports and the way they do their championships, maybe to make our tennis championship better or more appealing? Like, are there things you notice across the championships where like, why don't we try that in tennis? Or, oh, that's an interesting thing tennis is doing. Maybe we should apply that over there. Or is it just like, hey, there's nothing that translates?
Of course, I believe there's nothing new in this world. It's you got to remember history and learn from it. And there is everything's relative in this world, in my viewpoint. In our business, there could be the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and you go to a great community like Orlando, where the USDA is based, and have amazing bowl games, and it's basically the same framework and platform. And it's the same thing for championships and what you can learn. I mean, it's you can never rest on your laurels. We've learned that in every area we've been, whether it's our bowl game. For 90 plus years, we've always had a tier one position, but it's competitive, and you've got to be cutting edge, and you have to work really hard at your craft. And it's no different with the tennis world. We spend a lot of time with USTA leadership. Remember, or I don't know if your audience even knows this, that in the early 2000s, we sold the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships to the USTA, and they're the owners of it, and we are partners on it, and we invest in it here. But that's the way it's set up. And from a standpoint of, always being, cognizant that as good as your history is, you got to stay relevant. You've got to invest in that property. You've got to make it, connect to first and foremost the participants, to the tennis community. And that's not just nationally, but internationally, to make sure there's a relation to the prestige that it's built upon. You can't sit back. So I think what I've learned with all the different properties we have at the Orange Bowl is always pushing not to stand still. Stand still is to be left behind. You've got to always say, what are we doing facility-wise, event-wise? You know, how do we market this? How do we make it attractive to corporate partners that can give you the resources and capital to invest back in it? And you and I have talked about this recently when we were doing a little tour, and you know, I was amazed when you were talking about the USDA Florida, how similar it was to the Orange Bowl committee, and probably vice versa. The dynamics are the same. You know, I go around here in South Florida, and there's amazing events down here. The Miami Open's down here, Formula One's down here, golf at its finest in Palm Beach County is down here. We have non-sporting events, Art Basel, that's down here. But what makes the Orange Bowl, you know, I think very unique is nobody owns the Orange Bowl. Community owns the Orange Bowl. And we're standing on the shoulders of generations past, just like you mentioned, Eddie Herr. We're standing on people's like that's shoulders to sustain something. And so what makes it unique is that it's community treasure, but you have to be, you know, forward thinking. And that's what we've been doing. So we're really proud of this history. You know, when you go back, and I wear an orange jacket when I go out to events. You saw me, I think, at the tribute to Jim North, great tribute to Jim North. But we've also, you know, go to campuses for football games, and you realize the brand, what it represents. And you can say that to the tennis because, you know, aside from the majors, including the U.S. Open, when you go there and you see the junior tournament, you know how prestigious it is. This is a standalone event. It happens at the end of the year. In many cases, it may shape the final rankings for juniors around the world. And that's not lost on us. So we want to protect it, and we want to learn from all our events, and events like we see at the, you know, going to the U.S. Open, we learn things, how to make it second to none.
That's one of the things that I really appreciate about you and about the Orange Bowl and just getting to know you all. I can speak from a USTA perspective, having been here for 12 years, that I find so many times tennis has this very insular view, right? We don't look outside of ourselves to say, how do we remain competitive in the sports landscape? Like what's happening right now with March Madness is just watershed, right? What's happening with the women and the power that the women have, and all of that kind of, I look at what's happening in other sports, and I've always been fascinated by that. And then I've always sort of wondered why tennis doesn't look outside of itself more to things like what F1 is doing. And there's some amazing things happening. I was just looking on LinkedIn about that, about the technology in sport and how it's sort of, we're entering this prime opportunity for innovation. So what I love about you all is that because you have these different events, you actually can share those learnings, not just across your properties, but with us as well, where we might not have as much of a front row seat because we're in that tennis lane all the time. And so I'm just super excited to be able to work more with you all and to say, okay, how do we make this bigger and better? And you'll get to that at the end, and that'll be my last question for you all today. But before we get there, I wanted to go back to, you talked about the legacy that the Orange Bowl has in tennis. I mean, those past winners, you said it, it's like having a who's who of tennis. You know, you've got Chrissy, we just honored Mary Jo, you know, I think only 4-time winner, right, of the Orange Bowl.
Right.
Why do the top players, the top juniors, flock to this event? And why, in your opinion, is Florida, South Florida maybe in particular, the best place to host it?
Well, we all should be very proud of the great state, Sunshine State. And listen, you know, it's great for a lot of reasons, but you can clearly argue from November to April, it's paradise.
Best weather in
Yes,
the US,
it's the
maybe the
best.
world, I know.
It's the best way. And listen, you know, there's no simple answer. You know, going back to Eddie Herr, you know, I think there was a vision off that became a lot of events that led up to the final tournament of the year, which was the Orange Bowl. But I think that, you know, you know, it's evolved through the years because back in the day, there probably wasn't as many options. So in its infancy, it got a prestige from the very beginning. And based on the champions that were cited earlier, obviously it drew the best of the best. You see it now in any sport. You talked about learning from other sports. In the NBA, for example, kids are going earlier from college, than they used to. When I was growing up, like I mentioned, they stayed 4 years. Now there's many kids that are ready for the NBA, if not out of high school, 1 year out of high school after 1 year of collegiate basketball and so forth. You see it in tennis, they're going pro earlier. But, there's still, like anything, great competition that's in the junior ranks. And, this, we all should be proud of history and prestige. You see at the U.S. Open in Flushing Meadows, that it's got its rightful place amongst the greatest events in the world. And players want to win that tournament. And the junior ranks exists here. But I do think Florida has a lot to do with it. I grew up down here, and, tennis has always been one of the most popular sports for kids that are growing up. The weather's conducive for full year play. I think there's so many greats that have come from our part of the country that generation upon generation, it's built. We have an Orange Bowl Tennis Hall of Fame, and our first inductee was Chris Evert. And it didn't really dawn on me, Laura, and I've shared this with you before, but for the audience, that, in a big area like South Florida there's just so much movement. It's a transit area. It's a huge city, a lot of commerce. Sometimes communities are so fast moving, we don't take a moment to celebrate those that grew up down here and what they accomplished. And watching college football through the years, how many great players from high school go and play major college football? How many NFL players come from South Florida? And it dawned on me that you could argue that Chris Evert really is the greatest athlete that ever came from South Florida, from Fort Lauderdale, from Holiday Park. And, it just hit me when we were giving her this award, 18 major titles. I mean, that's incredible at a time where it was ultra competitive. And I think it speaks again to, she grew up in a great environment with a dad that was one of the great teachers, but in a park that had a great facility, in a state that offered full year-round play. And that's the ingredients of why the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championship thrived. And when she spoke and said when she was a youngster and won doubles, I think she was like 10, 11, 12 years old, and she looked at her TV where the Orange Bowl trophy sat and she said, I made it. I mean, that just lifted me. I was like, wow. I mean, you couldn't have had a better quote. And, so we're proud of that. And to salute that we want to invest in this. We want to make sure this tournament, connects to the USTA, both nationally and to you and your audience in the state of Florida, and to make sure that tennis is thriving in this area. Because not only does it offer participation, I wasn't a championship player growing up, but I played tennis growing up, and I loved it. And I love the competition. I love the idea that it offered individual competition for me, to go on a court, standing across from people I didn't know, and to compete. It offered, doubles where you were the teammate. It offered team competition. I went to camps, and I just have great memories of it. And I think it creates great values, great principles, great ethics, honesty, integrity, all those things that go with it. So it's a great, great sport, and we're going to protect it here at Orange Bowl.
Thank you for sharing that about Chrissy. One of the things that I also want to say about Chrissy and the legends that have come out of Florida tennis and played the Orange Bowl is something that is also a hat tip to you at the Orange Bowl, is that most of those legends grew up playing on a public tennis court. And it just so happens that the Orange Bowl has, I think, always been hosted on a public tennis court. So whether that's Flamingo Park, Brandon Park, now at Frank Beltry, is that the fact that you have this major international event that's actually being hosted in our public tennis center locations, not only are you investing back into the public tennis centers, but you're sending a clear message that this is where the champions play. This is where they come from. And I loved hearing Mary Jo talk about that and how she started in the game, and her parents were like, is she really that good? And and
Yes, she
they ended
was.
up actually asking one of her other founding fathers, Gardner Malloy, to hit with her to evaluate her. And so you kind of start to see the things that are foundational in our sport here in Florida. And I think that the Orange Bowl is really also another piece of that puzzle to say public tennis centers, have such a valued part of our ecosystem. We need to continue to invest in them, along with the other pieces too, right? Obviously, Chrissy has her academy, and we've got a very robust system there that's also extremely valuable. But I love the connection to the public part space and really appreciate you all valuing and investing in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously been our history to always be in a public facility, and it's so popular down here. I can't even describe to you. I mean, I've been here 30 years. I've had many conversations with USDA leadership, including you. And when we go out to these parks, the demand for court space is real, and it's there. And, great traditions, even just the general sport of playing tennis, need to be protected. It's been part of America for so many years. And you turn your head in every corner of our community, whether it's public courts, whether it's private country clubs, people are drawn to the sport. And we're just thrilled that, Orange Bowl is known for a lot of things, but I don't know if it's not the case to say it's most known internationally for the tennis tournament. So we're gonna cherish that, as I said earlier, and invest, and that may be, making sure that the public facilities wherever we play this event at any time have our support. And we want to see the next generation of, Coco Gauff won it in the last 5-6 years ago. Tiafo won it, I think, in 2013. The list goes on, and we want to see that continuing to happen at the Orange Bowl.
So I want to ask you a business question. I'm going to put my business hat on for just a minute, and then we'll wrap up with one final question. But, the economic impact with tennis, that's actually the Orange Bowl mission, right? It's to sort of foster that economic development. You mentioned it earlier. Miami was sort of this sort of cottage town. It's hard to imagine that now, but it was sort of
hard.
Cottage town, right? And you wanted people to come, please come to Miami. Now, sometimes we probably say, please go away. We don't want to see people here. I kid, of course. But can you talk a little bit about how this event particularly fueled that economy in South Florida, and maybe why other large cities? I mean, you referenced Orlando earlier, but I know, there's a lot of energy around sports in places like Tampa and Jacksonville as well, but we don't have these sort of flagship type of events there. And I'm always sort of curious if you could talk a little bit about how tennis events, these major tennis events, drive that local economy, and from a business perspective, why it's a smart investment.
The Orange Bowl goes back to 1935, as touched upon earlier. But the economic impact that comes with a bowl game is significant. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, for, a marquee matchup that draws into a community. And I have a philosophy that great communities have great events. Growing up down here and seeing the birth of the Lipton that became the Miami Open, and Rich Buchholz was on the Orange Bowl committee for many years. I consider him a really good friend. and a guy that was just a great community leader. Um, it's an incredible spectacle, whether it was on Key Biscayne or now at Hard Rock Stadium, for a 2-week period to bring to your community the best of both women's and men's tennis in one setting. It's not very common, aside from the majors, to see that. So we're very fortunate in that regard to see the outpouring of support from the community each and every year. It's incredible. I was out there last week when we inducted Harold Solomon in the Orange Bowl at Tennis Hall of Fame. It's important. I would take it down to our tournament. Tourism is pretty healthy throughout the year in Florida, whether it's South Florida, Central Florida, North Florida. People are drawn to the state, but it has its, ebbs and flows, and you can follow it. And clearly, when the bowl game comes around after Christmas to New Year's, it's at its height.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and the Orange Bowl is a big contributor to that. But it's just, during the holiday season, people have time to go on vacation. There's families have kids that are out of school in that time period. What makes the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships unique, it's generally late November, early December, and there is a need for tourism. And you start watching over a 10, 11-day period, the number of not just participants, but their coaches, their family that come down, and you start, realizing the number of bed nights that are taking place in our community. You also marvel at the draw that these next generation champions draw from the local neighborhoods to come watch them play. And so there's, just like anything, any event, you can say there's the direct tourism that's involved. There's the branding opportunity that the spotlight that one of the top junior tennis tournaments in the world brings from across the globe. I mean, I think 75 to 80 countries are usually represented in this tournament. So you just understand it's an economic engine that comes down here, and it's also a great treat for our residents to enjoy this annual event. So anyhow, to go back to your original question, I think, tennis is one of the great economic drivers in sports. They tend to be tournaments that aren't one day. They're over a period of time. I think they grab the attention of all corners of the community. Any demographic is represented. When you go out to the Miami Open, you can see it there. And it's only going to get bigger and better. So we're proud of it here in South Florida. I know you're proud of it throughout the state. And we look forward to continuing the Orange Bowl tradition to help tennis any way we can.
Yeah, I think that was well said. And I think the impact of the international tourism, there is a difference of international tourism versus domestic, and people stay longer. A lot of times we notice that even in our own facilities, right? We had a family that came over from Germany, and their son played in a tournament at one of our facilities. And I saw him the next week at Delray, and I said, "That's funny." I said, "How long are you staying?" And they said, "Oh, we're going home, but we've been here for 2 weeks." And it's like that impact is an extended impact. So the international nature of the event, to me, it just expands the potential impact that a city could have. And of course, Florida is an international state, so very, very friendly to the international community coming over here. Yeah, which is also another wonderful part of our state that people don't realize who don't come from here, is how truly international and diverse we are in so many levels.
Yeah.
Last question for you.
Yep.
How can USTA Florida better partner with you on this event and keep it growing and successful in the future?
It's a great question, and I would say how appreciative really all of us at the Orange Bowl Committee are to the USTA and everything that Lou Shear and his team do. Through, USDA, we met USDA Florida, we met you. and we came to understand the organizational structure and how important USTA Florida is to our event. It's really, I would reposition it as saying, how do we work with each other to remind each other, as touched upon earlier, you can never rest on your laurels. We're proud of our history and tradition. We really are. At the same token, you always got to be, best of class. So investment in facilities, mentioned public facilities. What can we do in Orange Bowl to invest in public facilities? What can we do to put a spotlight on not just the international tennis tournament that we produce, but how do we engage our community? How do we celebrate the youth tennis players here in the South Florida marketplace, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, even out to Naples, down to Key West, wherever it may be? What can we do? We are focused on this. It's become heightened in recent years when we've been visiting with you and Lou and Tracy Davies and others, of how important it is, to do that, because it's just an incredible platform for our organization, our brand, but it's also our community outreach is about youth and sports. We're a nonprofit, so we want to give back. How do we do that to touch this incredible, platform that our youth here in South Florida that are participating in tennis? How can we find the next Coco Golf? How can we get the average kid that just wants to play tennis and enjoy it, whether it's through juniors or through their high school years? How can we get back? So the answer to your question for me is, how do we collaborate at the highest levels of engagement? How do we get, our membership out there in greater numbers to volunteer, to join you in some of your goals and your strategies to rising tides lift all boats. Let's do it together.
I love that, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I've had to meet you. And I will say, let's come back to this pod in a year, because I think that as we go through this year, there's so many opportunities for us to collaborate and work together, to really, like you said, rising tide lifts all boats. How do we grow the grassroots programming year round? Because that is where the next champions come from. And then how do we do more to support this sister of ours that we grew up with, right, as USTA Florida, and support it in its growth, and to continue to make it the best in class international event that we have for Virginia. So thank you so much, Eric, for your time today. Genuinely appreciate everything that you do. Look forward to seeing you again soon, and again, I will definitely see you in December. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. I hope you enjoyed the topic. Please check our social media channels for more ways to engage with USTA Florida during our 75th anniversary year. And for more upcoming topics, dates, and episodes of the pod, visit USTAFlorida.com/here to serve.